Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here again. I was part of the last conversation as well. I'm quite excited to be with a different group of panelists this time. And we are basically spanning the world. So we have participants from the west coast of US to middle of US, East Coast, Europe, all the way to Australia at the moment. So thank you, everybody, for making the time from
Pleasure.
your morning to evening. And I want to give a chance for our attendees to even learn about your companies and businesses a little bit. Our topic is around artisanal businesses and ethical practices and what does sustainability mean for that. And it's great to have a range of businesses that are touching many parts of the world. And at a moment like this, engaging with a lot of communities around the world. Would love to hear a little bit about your story, what your business is about, what is your core mission. Ruth, do you want to get started?
Absolutely. Thank you. My name is Ruth DeGolia, and I'm Executive Director and founder of Mercado Global. We are a nonprofit that works with Indigenous women artisans in rural Guatemala, and we help them build community businesses that they own, and then we help them export to big fashion retailers internationally. So usually what we're doing are lots of handbags and accessories for big retailers like Levi's, Stitch Fix, Nordstrom, companies like that throughout the US, Europe, and Asia particularly. And right now, what we've been doing is we've been leveraging our model to help artisans continue to get income during the pandemic while also producing tens of thousands of masks for first responders in the US and Latin America.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Maybe we can move to Kohl to hear about non-supply.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be with this amazing panel of friends and faces, new and old. Yeah, I've been operating and working in the ethical fashion space for about the last 13 or 14 years through a number of different brands. The current project that really is taking up most of my time is a brand called Known Supply. Our focus is to celebrate the people who make our clothes and those who wear them. We really seek to be the brand that's bringing humanity back into the fashion conversation, the clothing conversation. And as many of these other panelists do, is just like celebrate those humans that are on the other side. So we do two main things. Every person who owns one of our products or, shops one of our partners can go onto our website and look up the specific person who made their product, because every item is signed by that person. And then secondarily, with Known Supply, one of the things we're really excited about is that we are working to just be a bridge to onboard all sorts of organizations, brands, and other businesses into this idea of ethical fashion by purchasing our blank apparel and accessories and helping to customize and personalize those items for different companies, just so that this idea of ethical and sustainable practices can just be more accessible to more types of people and in more avenues.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. And we can move to Nest. Rebecca, would you like to talk about Nest as well?
Sure. Thanks, Burak. So I'm the founder of an organization called Nest. We work with artisan and craft and maker businesses in the United States and globally. And as a nonprofit, our mission is to really support those maker businesses in their expansion and their growth and their scalability. And we do that by raising philanthropy and investing directly in our partners, but then also we support corporate partners, a huge range from, Target to Hermes on how they work with artisan supply chains and how we can better enhance the use of artisan in supply chains. And so some of our core programs, we run an ethical handcraft program, so helping bring transparency to the artisan sector, which is often home-based and or in small unregulated workshops. And so ensuring that there's visibility and fair wages in that space. And then we also have a program in the US called Makers United, which is working with cities and city and multilateral partners and ensuring that the kind of booming makers economy is egalitarian and inclusive. And so really making sure that we're supporting and recruiting makers into this space of all walks of life, of all colors, of all income levels, of all ability and disability. And so really to ensure that our future and the makers economy is vibrant. And so we work with some of the people on the panel, and we're excited, super excited to be here.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And lastly, Theodore, would love to hear from you as well.
Hi, everyone. Good morning from Australia. Now, our company is fairly complicated, but I own a company called Apparel, which is one part of our larger business. And we focus on half our company makes uniforms, and the other half of the company makes fashion apparel for fashion brands, small and big, from all over the world. I haven't always been into sustainable, ethical manufacturing because I didn't know about it. But the last 3 or 4 years, especially, I have been focusing on that completely and have changed everything that we do and the way we go about things. From an ethical and sustainable point of view, generally we focus on a lot of RPET, so recycled plastic bottles, because we deal with a lot of commercial manufacturers and a lot of commercial companies, and they use a lot of polyester. So it's a means to an end. So, and I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, because, you know, that does have other sustainable implications on the environment. But at the same time, I've got so many clients that are selling to millions of customers that are wearing polyester. So the least I can do for now is get them to at least get that polyester virgin pellet from a recycled plastic bottle plant rather than the oil industry, which is at least getting their customers used to sustainability, and also exposing sustainability to a customer that generally wouldn't even think about it. And the other thing that we try to do is, as well as beautiful it is for all of us to keep working together, because we're all sustainably minded, which is an amazing thing. My staff and myself really try to get into companies that really don't want to get into sustainability, and have no interest, and money is the bottom line. So generally what we've done now is we've created a beautiful streamline where I can go to a very commercial fast fashion brand and show them how to go green without changing their bottom line. It's not costing them any money, and they're starting to pay a little bit more attention. So yeah, they're just a means to win it. And sometimes it's a lot easier to talk to someone that's on the same wavelength as you. But if they're not, and you want to get through to them and, you know, make a change, then you have to speak their language, you know, which is what we've learned to do.
That's amazing. Yes, and you don't have to necessarily be in the same wavelength. We are all here to make a change. So I'm glad you're taking those steps. So I mean, you know, it's great to hear all of the ways you study your business, how you engage with both the customers, brands, even B2B models, all the way to artisans. I'm really curious with everything that has been happening because of the pandemic in the past several months. Would you be able to share if you had to pivot your activities? Have you taken action to support relief efforts? Did you have to change the type of product you're producing, or did you have to stop or look at alternatives? I'm just opening up to the group. Please feel free to jump in.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to share what we've done. For us, we started preparing contingency plans in late February, and as the situation evolved, started switching by mid-March into really, in many ways, redesigning and rebuilding how we worked and what we do. And the immediate thing that we did was we started realizing, you know, we wanted to be part of the solution and figure out, especially being based in New York City and seeing what was going on, how could we be part of an effort to help get masks to, originally it was doctors and nurses, but then expanded beyond that. And you know, we were around in the last recession, and in many ways, the last recession was both horrible, but one of the best things that ever happened to us, because it forced us to get smart as an organization. And one of the things we learned from that is that in every crisis, there's an opportunity. And that was the mentality as an organization that we've taken into this, is looking at, okay, take a moment to cry and grieve about the plans for this amazing, huge gala in Silicon Valley we had planned, all the orders we had in the pipeline for our spring summer 20 collection, everything that was wonderful that was going on that was no longer going to be possible. Cry and then think about, okay, but what's the opportunity here? How can we be part of the solution? And figured what we did was we worked to mobilize as an organization to go after the new opportunities. And it was hard. So, you know, with our operations in Guatemala is one of the 2 countries with the most strict restrictions on travel throughout the entire pandemic. and we work in 70 communities all throughout the Highlands. So everything from reimagining our supply chain to reimagining how we work with artisans instead of groups coming each Friday to drop off finished goods, pick up materials. We had to start sending vans around throughout of our communities and negotiate with every community and municipal government and state government, department government, permission to be able to travel when nobody else was being able to travel. So it was really challenging, but by working as a team, we've been able to pivot. And so far, I think we're in the second inning, but we're feeling we're doing a really great job. We're excited that we've already shipped about 65,000 masks, mostly to first responders in the US and Mexico, which is really exciting.
Amazing.
That's amazing.
You're a part of that, so maybe I can just piggyback on Ruth. So at Nest, we work with Mercado Global, and then we have a network of about 1,000 artisan and maker businesses globally, and obviously in the U.S. and abroad. Those are micro and small businesses who are at the front lines of the economic and health impacts of the crisis. And so we did several kind of Zoom calls right away with our partners to hear what people were doing, and then developed this kind of 4-pronged strategy that we've been rolling out. One being that so many of our partners like Ruth and Mercado Global were already transitioning to PPE, but they were being asked, which I still find totally baffling, to do all of this volunteer, invest all of their own human resources, material cost, all of it for the good of the world, which is great. And everyone wanted to, but they don't have the margins. They just don't have they're on razor thin margins as it is. So that just wasn't feasible. And so the very first thing we did was mobilize a bunch of our corporate partners. So MasterCard, QVC and HSN, Amazon, Target, a whole bunch of companies got behind the initiative. And we started purchasing, quote unquote, purchasing the PPE that was being donated to frontline workers. So we funded in 18 countries and 4,000 workers, and have made up to 200,000, I think, and counting masks, thanks to people like Ruth. So we did that, which has been super exciting, and delivering masks in local economies. So if you're in Cameroon making masks, it's going to Cameroon hospitals and nursing homes, and then also working with New York City Public Housing Authority and USPS, the United States Postal Service, to get masks to them. But then we realized a lot of our artisan network are not textile producers. And so switching to PPE wasn't going to be feasible. So we launched an in-kind grants program where we're funding artisan businesses to have direct-to-consumer websites if they weren't already selling direct-to-consumer and they were relying on wholesale orders, which we've learned from our partners. Over 85% of wholesale orders have been canceled or indefinitely delayed, leading to massive layoffs and furloughed of artisan workers. So they can either apply for a website, marketing and sales strategy for a short period of time, or flat out financial relief where we're investing in canceled orders that brands chose not to continue on and fulfill their purchase order. So we don't want our artisan businesses sitting on unsold inventory. So we're in the process of rolling it out. We were super excited. We raised $1 million in a month for all of this, which was really great to see people come together. But again, like from Ruth, you don't want to have a tragedy to have to mobilize people. You want that to be kind of part of our day-to-day operation. So how we kind of make sure we're supporting people, but also really using this so that we don't have this kind of situation, and that we, as global citizens, as an industry, are better prepared.
Fantastic.
But what's incredible learning is to be able to operate during a pandemic globally in a national structure. Nobody has ever has experienced before. So you guys already did a great job there. Hey, Kohl, Theodore, do you have any?
Yeah, what I found is, I mean, when this first happens, and we sat down with all my staff and we're like, okay, half our business is dead, because half our business is uniforms for the medical industry, and that's fine. But then half our business died because it's fashion, and all my fashion customers were like canceling orders, going crazy, firing their staff, finding excuses to find their staff too when they didn't have to. They did it very, very early on, within days. So then we had to adapt. But the thing is, being in the fashion industry, or most industries anyway, we always have crises. So I don't see this as a complete, abnormal thing. It's just a matter of adapting, like we always do. And generally, if you've been working in the fashion industry for more than 5 or 10 years, you would have seen a crisis every 2 years, regardless, whether it be some sort of recession, or even just when tastes and mode and fashions changes and leave you behind. You have to adapt to catch up, right? So this is just one of those circumstances. What we've done now, again, so half our business now we've turned into PPE, where we're making surgical and isolation gowns. And so what we've done there is about 600 to 800 people in Victoria and Melbourne, which is the state that I live in Australia, lost their jobs because they didn't have any fashion clothing to make, you know. So what we did is we've got 2 factories in China. One of the factories we changed over to make surgical gowns, which is a very easy change. So instead of using a sewing machine, a normal sewing machine that has a needle and thread, we had to get ultrasonic machines, which look exactly the same, just that they've got a little roller at the bottom and they weld the fabric together so that they remain impervious. So then what we did is we sent a few of these machines over to Australia. We've donated them to the local factories here. And literally all I do during the day at the moment, because I've got a lot of spare time as well, is go to the factories and teach the old Vietnamese, Greek, Italian old ladies and men how to use these machines. I get paid in food at the end of the day, pretty much. So depending on the culture that I'm with during that day, I'll get a takeaway container of either Greek or Vietnamese food lately. But that's allowed them to start working again, and now we're creating sales within government and within private sector and within our normal medical avenues. And there's a real push for non-Chinese made. Not there's anything wrong with Chinese made. We just need a better balance of it. So we've been way too reliant on it. So now we're finding ways of just creating a little bit more balance. We're talking to some people in LA now as well, and I'm helping them set up locally made surgical gowns made properly to AMI level standards, worldwide standards, and especially in the US, because the way you guys work there and the minimum wage is a little bit lower, you guys can actually compete with China directly. So it's actually not that hard. I just don't think people realize that the divide between made in China and made in US wasn't actually that different. It's only about 15-20%. And when you take out shipping costs, it's actually a lot closer. So I think America especially is waking up to that now, and it's going to be a whole new normal, and we'll see how it sort of eventuates. Yeah.
And in some ways, I mean, this ties to the question I was going to ask. Maybe, Kohl, you can tie your answer to that as well. But
yeah.
I was wondering how the pandemic is forcing the industry to reimagine the way apparel production is being done. So how you adapted is one question, but also do you see the industry evolving in a new direction because of this? Are we going to see new permanent changes?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I know for ourselves, even just to feed off what Theodore was saying, we've historically used our apparel production as a means of empowerment, and predominantly have seen, you know, the place where we could have potentially the most impact with being within developing economies. So working initially in Uganda, then Peru, and now India, with different fair trade certified partners has always been a focus of ours. Recently, and this ties into initial question too, it was the question of, okay, our Indian producers were down for, you know, the country was almost on complete lockdown for close to 2 months. We did want to respond to and find ways to make an impact in the short term. And we found some local suppliers right here in our backyard in California, where we were literally taking older inventory, t-shirts and other things, and cutting those up and making facial coverings and things for sort of consumer and daily use. And so that was really interesting. I think it did spark us toward an understanding of local manufacturing that we hadn't really thought about before, or that it didn't feel as missional as it did in this moment. But moving forward, you know, it's very interesting to take a look at what the long-term impacts will be. I think the other thing for us, as far as both our response and the ways that I think people will view their apparel moving forward, is just merchandise became an even more interesting play in the last 2 to 3 months as small businesses closed down or were struggling with revenues. and they were spinning up online stores similar to what Rebecca was talking about, whether that be your local pizza shop or local coffee or what have you. It's like everyone was like, we need an online store and we need merchandise to sell so that we can, keep the lights on and weather this storm. And so that is really interesting. It sort of plays into this idea of the hyper local support, and the role of merchandise shifting a little bit, I think, in some really interesting ways. I know for us, we sort of have inventory on hand, have blank inventory. So one of the things we were doing was reaching out to small businesses or having others nominate small businesses. And we were just giving free apparel away, free customized apparel to say, hey, we know your businesses are shuttering or hurting from this time. We have this resource. How can we deploy this quickly to maybe get some revenue happening, whether you're a dance studio that had to close down or, like I said, a coffee shop or something of that sort. So I think the role of apparel, I don't think it's that people are necessarily going to be buying less in the long term. My hope is that they're buying more thoughtfully, and in turn, the supply chain and the authenticity of these brands that are, putting product out into the world, and those brands that the customers choose to support, I feel like is in a moment of shifting. I hope for the better, and that's what I want to believe.
Yeah, no, thank you for that insight. And honestly, I'm also questioning with exactly what you're saying, what's happening with the shifts, technological advancement, but also things that are suddenly localizing. I'm really curious about the future of the artisan sector as well. So I would love to hear both Rebecca and Ruth give their thoughts about, is the future different, bright?
Yeah, I think for us, I feel like I get the question in interviews all the time, like, will robotics put the craft sector out of? I think for us, I founded Nest 13 years ago at Mercado Global. I think you guys are similar in age. And like no one was talking about Artisan back then. It was like maybe like a kitschy Christmas tree ornament, maybe like something you got on your travels, but Etsy was founded like the year after. So like just to like place where we were in our thinking as a global society. And now there's like Artisan Doritos and Artisan Hotels and Artisan everything. And every major company wants to sell handmade in some way. And I think that it just speaks to the fact that robotics and automation and like the technological advancements are good, and those will continue, but they're not going to solve everything for everyone. And the more we promote that, the more the human psyche is going to want something else. And so every company wants to have a counterweight to that. And so they want the handmade while they're introducing robotics for everything else. And so I think that's really why we've seen this like parallel growth. And so I think that the more we advance technology, honestly, I think the stronger the artisan economy gets, because I think that humans just will continue to want that yin and yang in our lives, which I think is exciting. But I also want to say that I think the craft sector has to evolve. Like I think and I sometimes get in debates about this with people in the craft sector, but we take a really broad look at what we consider artisan at Nest. And I think that, with things like 3D printing and like the advances in technology, there's a lot of cool things that we think still stay within the world of artisan craft handwork, while still incorporating technology. And so I think that there is a future for craft that also integrates technology into it. And we need to be a part of that, and we need to celebrate that and understand that. And so, and really help people carry that forward. So we really see those things happening synergistically.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And maybe just to add on to that, we work with technology in different ways, but we also, we think of ourselves as first and foremost an anti-poverty organization and a social justice organization, and secondarily as an artisan organization. And we constantly are using and developing new technological strategies to help artisans be able to earn more per day in what they're doing and compete. And, in terms of how, we see the global crisis impacting the sector, so Rebecca and Nest and Mercado Global were both made it through the last big economic crisis. And what we found then was that was the first time during the darkest days of the Great Recession, was the first time that we felt there was massive interest in consumers. They might not be able to buy much. Maybe they can only buy one necklace or one bag this year instead of many, but they desperately wanted to buy something that had meaning. And I think right now people are starving, they're craving for meaning, and they're craving for connection. And I think running social justice organizations, socially responsible businesses, and artisan, made products, we have this opportunity to help provide that connection between the maker and the wearer, and women across the Americas, people across the Americas. And, for us, obviously there were other factors going on here, but April was by far, we had about 4 times more sales online. Our online business is a small part of our business, but we sold about 4 times more in April than any other month in the history of the organization. We did launch our masks in the last week of April, which was part of it. But, I think it was fascinating to see how many people wanted to come and support us and help us in that way. And so I think there's insight into, there's a crisis, there are a lot of challenges, but there are also a lot of opportunities for the sector going forward.
Yeah.
That's great. And I guess you talked about kind of the demand and what people crave for. It takes me to a much more of a philosophical question, I guess, that we were discussing before getting on to this session, is the role of humanity within the sustainability paradigm. So I would love to just get a sense of, as humans who are consumers and individuals, makers and artisans, what is the role that we play in supporting the idea of sustainability and making it real?
We've had a lot of that come up lately, especially the whole philosophical question about humanity and ethics. And I have a lot of people that are trying to help, sometimes in the wrong way, especially with maybe what Ruth and Rebecca do as well, because you have a lot of bureaucrats that don't really understand various cultures and try and project their culture onto other people's cultures, which doesn't also work. And what might seem bad in their eyes is not so bad in someone else's eyes. And we can't expect everyone around the world to work in the same way that we think is right or wrong. It can still be ethical, even if it might look wrong to us. I usually say, if I get stuck with a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of people that are trying to do the right thing, I guess, but have not really had a lot of life experience and are ticking boxes that they've read out of a book, you know what I mean, which doesn't always happen. And I try to tell them that, let's say the golden rule, right? We all know the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated. Okay. And I try and change the paradigm of their thinking. And because the golden rule is something the whole world generally agrees on, right? But if I, like to cut myself or hurt myself, should I cut or hurt you? No. All right. So maybe we should treat others the way they want to be treated, not the way we want to be treated. Okay. And I try and really implement into their heads, so then they change the way they approach ethics and ethically made. I grew up for a big part of my time in a small Greek village that had just donkeys and no roads, and I was the happiest I've been in my life, and the community was amazing. But someone from a big city would come and see me, would be like, "Wow, this is horrible." You know what I mean? How are they living like this? And we just wanted to be left alone and just to work in our own environment and make whatever money we could, So that's one of the hardest things I'm finding, dealing with a lot of bureaucracy, and I'm trying to get that out of the way before it gets to people like Rebecca and Ruth and Kohl and so on. But yeah, philosophy and education, I think, has to be looked at quite. We have to really look at the broader spectrum of the way we think and how we affect others, and stop projecting our own kind of ideals and really look at how that person wants to be helped, But yeah.
Yeah. And I would just sort of add on to that in saying that I believe the humanity in this social issue that we're talking about of, whether you want to call it ethical manufacturing, of sustainability, but I think it really expands into almost every social issue. The humanity, in my view, is like the core component.
Yes.
And it's this because we can only change the things that we care about. And we can only care about the things that we can see ourselves being impacted by, or that we can understand, that we can empathize with. And so it's really one thing to talk about issues at a global scale and to say people live in poverty every day. People, to take in current events, people live in racial injustice every day. But it's not, we won't choose to do anything about it until we are able to understand the humanity within it, because then we understand how it could impact us, or we could understand, or at least try to understand, how it's impacting another human being. And that's, for me, the key to the broader conversation. And I think what everybody in this panel, from the work that I know and have known for a long time, for some of you, that I'm always so impressed by, is that everyone holds that at such a high level, but then they're finding ways to create bridges and to help invite other people into that understanding of humanity. And I think it's incumbent upon any one of us who own businesses or organizations that are thinking in this way. But it's the same for, you, if ethical consumerism or fashion is something that you're passionate about, it's an incumbent upon you to help other people see the humanity in it in a way that they can wrap their head around and understand, and start to change some of their behaviors as a result.
And Kohl, maybe just to tie to that, it would be great to also hear your opinion around creating a platform that increases accessibility to ethically made goods versus building a vertical brand that's ethically minded. What is the right way to approach? Is there a place for both?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. And I think it's especially fantastic because I think everyone on this panel can speak into it equally as well as me. But I think what I'm so encouraged by is that it really will take both types of organizations. Just for context, I mean, we started pretty early on in this process, like Rebecca and Ruth, are talking. We're of the same vintage, perhaps, which we're like the old folks in the ethical fashion conversation.
The pioneers.
Yeah, the pioneers. Okay, there you go. Thank you. I don't want to be ageist. But I think what's been cool to see is that for so long it was so many of these sort of like everybody setting out to try to put their stamp on ethical manufacturing or social impact and creating these vertical brands. But you realize over amount of time that there's only so much impact individual brands could do. They can reach really specific communities in really, really important ways. But the ideas of how do we get this conversation just more broadly spoken about? How do we make this within a consumer's or shopper's mind? How do we get people thinking that ethical fashion is something that is just as accessible, just as quality, just as fashionable? And I think that's where the idea of creating platforms and helping sort of not only bottom up, like a vertical brand might be best at, helping individual consumers thinking about how to make change or with their individual purchases, but also working top down. How are we thinking about creating the avenues to allow for these larger corporations to even begin taking steps in that direction? And I know that, Nest is an example I use all the time, honestly, Rebecca, shout out to you, of just like, somebody who is doing a platform and who's creating those inroads to a really big question. Because I think at every level, people are asking it in 2020 and have been maybe for years, but they don't have actionable steps. And so if we can help create pathways and inroads for people to begin engage, even in small ways, I think what we'll see is that they'll get a taste of not only the impact of that, but even the, potential profitability in it and all those things. And that'll only make it grow.
Yeah, and maybe I can quickly tie to that with the mention to Nest. We have a question from Mira Postolash as well. What are the right actions that artisans need to take to move forward in fashion industry for the lockdown? I think it ties to what you're doing with your business model, but not everybody is working with Nest. Beyond just working with organizations like Nest, what can smaller artisan groups can do? Do you have any recommendations, both you and Ruth?
Sure, I can start, and then Ruth, you can chime in. I think like also kind of tying back in the humanity thing, I think all of us on this panel probably see this, but I think that one of the challenges is that it's very easy for companies to talk about the environmental impact, and it's a lot harder for them to admit and come forward and talk about human impact. And so I think for those of us more focused on the human labor side of the equation, that's like and I think there's often a financial, and like it's a win-win often financially and environmentally for some of the solutions, whereas usually solving labor challenges increases your costs because usually it's around wages and other things. And so I think there's an uphill battle that's implicit in the humanity side of the fashion sustainability question that I think we need to grapple with, we need to come to terms with, and we all need to really acknowledge and continue to force it to be part of the narrative, so that you can't skirt around that piece of it and focus only on the environmental impacts that you're having as a company. So I need to say that. But then, so then we have Nest launched a seal of ethical handcraft, and I think it's important because it helps bring kind of an added layer of transparency into artisan labor, which is often in homes and small workshops. And I think in the global pandemic, it was super interesting because a lot of companies have quote unquote no home worker policies because they're nervous about sourcing from places that they don't have transparency. And so the development of the platform was not to like be big brother to artisan businesses. It was to say that shouldn't be a barrier to artisan sourcing. So if you're going to claim that that's the barrier, we'll solve it for you. And here are the standards and here are the processes of how you have transparency. And now we've been implementing that around the world, which has been exciting. And so I think it's part of like kind of breaking down some of these things. But we were able to mobilize with Ruth and others, home-based workers. Like India was on lockdown for 2 months. We had a huge workforce of home-based workers who were very able to produce PPE for us. And so if you can make homework accessible and safe, it's the future of work. Like I think people think of artisan sector as like niche and old school and antiquated. The cottage industry is going to be the future of work. And we're going to look to our like brown and black and indigenous sisters who created that model and perfected it. And it's going to be what's implemented in the United States. In 10 years, it'll be true.
And Burak, maybe if I could just add on to that, just on the humanity question, 2 thoughts. One is that I think that what's going on today has just highlighted the extent to which we need to rebuild our world to be more socially just, like straight up rebuild our world. And I think the artisan sector can play a big part in that movement, because it can be a vehicle for empowering disadvantaged and oppressed peoples around the world and connecting them to the global market. And I think it's important. Political structures are extremely important, but are also tied to economic structures. And if we have unjust economic structures, it's very hard to sustain just political structures and social structures, even if you could attain them for a short period of time. So I think it's really important that we think about that and think about what role can our sector play in rebuilding a more just world. Also on that, I think a challenge that the ethical fashion industry can think about is what do we have to learn and think about from what's going on right now? And I think one thought is, even on our panel, that even though many of the workers are people of color and from disadvantaged backgrounds, I think it's helpful to think about what voice does everyone have within the organizations and within businesses, and is there anything that we can learn from what is going on right now? And what's going on right now has always been going on, but what's being discussed right now, at least in the US. And it's interesting. So for us, we never use the term beneficiaries. We don't refer to our artisans. We're a nonprofit, but we don't refer to our artisans as beneficiaries. We only refer to them as partners. And sometimes it will confuse grant makers. But to us, they're partners. They've helped us build the organization. All of our leadership for operations in Guatemala, including the head of our operations, are Indigenous women. But it's something that we're constantly thinking about and working on and trying to get better at. How do we make sure that we're authentic, that our artisans have a full voice within our model? So just something to throw out. The last thing is just, on what you said, later about what are the opportunities for small artisan businesses. It is fascinating to see how I think, at least in Guatemala, we're seeing that the localization movement is providing opportunities for artisan businesses. So we've always trained all of the co-ops that we work with we help them sell locally as well, not just internationally through us. And there has been increased demand for their products locally as the borders have closed and markets have closed and supply chains have broken down. So it's interesting to think about what I actually think that with what's going on right now, at least in the short term, there might be more of a local or regional demand for artisan made products than there has been in the past.
Yeah, amazing. No, thank you for those insights, Ruth. And I'm curious on the other side of the world and in Australia, Theodore. I mean, what is your experience? You mentioned about using, for example, recycled polyester in the products. Is there also a demand for that being ethically made? How do you talk about the premium you're asking for the work you're doing to the brands? And are they doing it because they see it as a marketing opportunity, or because we are seeing a shift in even business owners' mindsets?
There's generally a shift in people's mindset around the world and in Australia as well. But the bottom line does count a lot, especially with big business. If it's going to cost them money, a lot of times they don't want to know about it. So we're just finding ways of doing it where they're still making money. And a lot of the conversations I have with them, ethics and sustainability at the end of the conversation. At the start of the conversation is just changing the supply chain and the way they get things made, and then ethics and sustainability come at the end, because I've just learned not to scare anyone, because a lot of these companies have been badgered by people, or have had the wrong experience. It's like even in fashion, generally when we talk about ethical manufacturing, you think of like old clothing or recycled clothing and all that, so we need to change that. We've got a new brand now that's coming out that's going to be all around the world, and it's a young, hot girls brand that young girls are going to love, hopefully. And sustainability and ethics is kind of in the background, you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, it needs to be a very fashionable, hot brand to change the mentality of ethical, sustainably made. Sometimes can seem a little bit old-fashioned, which is wrong, you know what I mean? Whereas when it comes to RPET, what we're trying to do in Australia here, there's a company that you guys should look up called Blocktex, Block TEXX. And they're probably one of the first ones in the world that created this beautiful technology where we can take a RPET garment or any polyester garment or even polycotton garment, give it to them. 2 hours later, they've recycled it into virgin polyester pellets or cotton sludge, which gets used in toothpaste and whatever. And the only byproduct is water. So we're nearly at the level now where we're just locally, at least, and we'll try and implement this all over the world anyway. I can create a uniform, for instance, have that uniform go into a nursing home for 2 years, get used, come back to me, go to Blocktex, create a virgin polyester pellet, and then make the uniform again. So it's perpetual recycling. And I know, again, it's plastics, and it's not the most amazing thing in the world to focus on, but they're out there and they're being used, and they're being used in the wrong way. So we might as well use something that exists and not have to make more of it. You know what I mean? So yeah, there's other companies other than Blocktex too doing some beautiful things, but we're just trying to find ways to really make it circular and perpetual. Like it's perpetual recycling, which we want to do, So if a plastic bottle gets made, and that turns into something, we don't need to recreate it again. We can just keep using that on and on again, because it's a 99.9% reuse rate on these recycling methods. So it's amazing. It can last forever.
Yeah, I mean, you already give us a hint of what's to come in the near future with your business operations and how you're integrating innovation. I just wanted to wrap it up asking all the other panelists as well, is there anything new coming with your organization? What are your predictions for the short to medium term, having all of the unpredictability of what's to come in the next 12 to 24 months?
Let me grab my crystal ball. I have it right here.
It's a long time, Burak. That's a long time.
Yeah, I think that overall, my sort of not necessarily prediction, but just what I'm seeing, and to also play off of what Theodore was saying, is just that, the business and their interaction with their merchandise, their uniforms, their apparel, I believe is starting to shift a little bit. That businesses, due to increased pressure from shoppers, from employees, from other stakeholders, they are starting to look at a more holistic view of their business, and they realize that it's, more and more of these companies are putting up value statements and saying, hey, we stand for these things. But they're not necessarily filtering through, do these ideals match up to the merchandise that you sell? Do they match up to the way you treat your employees? I mean, we see enough of that happening in the news, or sort of the negative sides of that, to realize that, like, people are being held to account at higher levels today. It feels like to me, and I think in a positive way. And so I am interested in and excited about and actively working toward, what does that look like for fashion? What does that look like for the merchandise, the clothing, the things that the uniforms, things that people are wearing to put out their message into the world, or, are necessary aspects of employee retention and just business as usual. That gets me really excited, because it's more of, as opposed to, like, strictly just numbers conversation, it's really lending itself toward and working toward a more holistic view of how a business can meet the values and the ideals that they put out in the world. And we all get to be a part of, like, helping them do that in a really productive way, I like to think, and not like a condescending way or a negative way. We're just saying, hey, we know we want to help you sort of deliver on the values that you've established, and we're here to, like, help you see those through.
Exactly.
Oh, thank you so much. We are out of our time, but Rebecca and Ruth, do you have one sentence you want to finish up with?
Oh, Kohl did it great. I'm backing Kohl.
I would say adapt, be creative and adapt, and really figure out how to effectively tell the message of the authenticity and connection to the maker behind the brands. I think those are the two big opportunities.